Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World live every Sunday 9 to 11 p.m. GMT. Check out our archive and programme stream at windowsontheworld.net. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Windows on the World, and quite an interesting one for you tonight. Every week I sort of trawl various publications for the most ludicrous and hypocritical stories, because we are in the post-truth world, and I've got a few of those for you tonight. Had a very good day in Brighton on Saturday, and it was a full house after we'd had several of our talks that were booked there cancelled by, I think, just a couple of subversives, because this doesn't happen to us anywhere else. And we've got plenty more of them coming up. But it was a really good day, actually. And the venue that we did this in Hove, actually, a little pub there, the Poets' Corner, was very hospitable to the event. So we'd like to thank them. And also like to thank Stuart, who really helped. It was brilliant on the day, actually, and ferried all of the people from Hove Station to the venue, and even helped us out with technical stuff. So that was great. And yeah, got back yesterday. I'm pretty tired, so I didn't do a show last night. But yeah, I've been trawling the publications today, and I've come up with some stuff that's absolutely gold dust. It's absolute gold dust. But I'd like to tell you some dates that we've got. Next Saturday, which is Saturday the 16th of November, we'll be in Bristol, and that's 12 till 6 p.m. The Arc, which is 27 Broad Street, Bristol, BS12HG. There's actually an event Facebook page for that, and Stephen O'Neill, who's been publicising it for us, has actually made some little interview clips, and he's put them up there. They sort of help sell it, and it's called The Bigger Picture. Yes, The Bigger Picture, the Real Citizens' Assembly. That's what it is, because we're having these citizens' assemblies imposed by consensus through guess who? Yes, George Soros is actually funding the organisation called Involve that's rolling out your citizens' assembly. So maybe you should create one for yourselves. We've been suggesting that people do this. But yeah, Saturday 16th of November, the Arc in Bristol. 24th of November, we're going to Aberdeen to the Turriff Baden-Powell Community Centre, Baden-Powell Road, Turriff, AB 53 4FE. There's an Eventbrite bookings page on windowsontheworld.net if you want to book for that one. Saturday, 30th of November, the Bigger Pictures hitting Colchester, Essex at 1:30 p.m. till 7 p.m. It's £10 in advance and £12 on the door. It's at Tollgate Hall, behind Stanway Community Centre, Villa Road, Colchester. And there is an Eventbrite bookings page for that on windowsontheworld.net. Saturday the 14th of December, 11 till 6 p.m. The Bigger Picture at the Steiner Academy, Hereford, HR28DL, £10 on the door. Contact biggerpicturehereford@gmail.com. That's biggerpicturehereford@gmail.com. There's a mobile number you can call, and it's Chris who's putting that on in Hereford. 07870 149 745. Now, yes, as I was saying at the beginning, while looking at stories this week, I found something which effectively sums up the post-truth and post-fact world we now inhabit, the world of the narcissistic, virtue-signalling hypocrite. And this stuff is gold dust. You know, the type who are stealing my future. How dare you? Get this. Climate change is a man-made problem with a feminist solution. This is from the New York Times, and it describes a podcast called The Mothers of Invention. Invention, I would say, is stretching it a bit. It says, the podcast The Mothers of Invention stands apart in the field of climate communication. They tell stories that battle climate change with a little humour thrown in. Well, I've listened to a couple of them, and I would state that there was a bit of a problem with the trade descriptions in the title there. But we'll get into that, because this really does uncover exactly what we talk about week after week after week. In other words, you've got these people like NGOs and these organisations all linked in to the UN, and they're all saying the same thing. This totalitarian rollout of United Nations Agenda 2030 and Agenda 21, which is all done on the back of climate change, which is what we talk about a lot in our talks, because this is the main thing that's facing everyone up and down the country and around the world at the moment. But it's the thing that hardly anyone's talking about. But this takes the biscuit. This is fantastic. It's in the New York Times, which is only superseded with virtue signalling nonsense by the UK Guardian. I listened to one episode and I can confirm that this show, it's, climate change is a man-made problem with a feminist solution, which is titled The Mothers of Invention. It's about as funny as Ebola, actually, and it's more trivial and irritating than breakfast TV. They tell us how the fashion industry is creating global warming, right? But the fashion industry is creating even more global warming than, guess what? Pets. Yeah, this is true. I'm not kidding, and neither are they. In an NGO virtue signalling festival of fake left totalitarian control rolled out as empowerment, it states, I did learn that making one pair of jeans creates as much greenhouse gas as driving a car for 80 miles, and one cotton shirt takes 2 months of drinking water. Now, this is a UN propaganda rollout, the like of which I have actually never heard before. And it's run by this woman called Mary Robinson. And there's another lady involved in it as well called Maeve Higgins, who's meant to be an Irish comic and writer, but I've yet to see any evidence of that. Because I've listened to one episode here and I was starting to listen to another one. But basically, Mary Robinson is the chair of the elders, the UN useful idiots brought together to inflict global governance by Nelson Mandela. I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up, really, could you? But they do. But there's another group of fancy-dressed tribal elders who distribute cliches on behalf of the United Nations at public events, including Glastonbury Festival. We covered them over the summer. They're basically people that they call indigenous in their fancy dress costumes who spout cliches about being close to the earth and consciousness and sustainability. And guess what? Vibrant communities. Yeah, they all do it. But it says here in their bill matter, around the world, women, predominantly poor, black, brown and indigenous women, how patronising can you get, are disproportionately affected by climate change. They live intimately with climate chaos. Do they? Do they live intimately with climate chaos? That can seem distant or abstract in space and time from the lives of many in the global north, especially the two idiots who are promoting this. Well, it's certainly harder work. But do other countries need fake left feminists with their empowerment drivel? It is harder work living in a lot of other countries. But this is basically a front for non-governmental organisation interference. That's all it is. And basically implementing the goals of this United Nations Sustainable Development Gulag programme. It says for some, statistic like the ones above are enough. For most people, the catalyst for caring, let alone taking action, is stories. The lived experience of others who can translate their own narrative into something more essential about what it is to live with climate change. Well, I think everyone on the planet's got a story about climate change, haven't they? I mean, it changes every day. The women who make the podcast, Mothers of Invention, already know all of this. Oh, they do. Oh, they are a pair of know-it-alls, which makes them stand apart in the field of climate communication. Yeah, they do believe they know it all, but what could possibly go wrong? Well, I'll tell you. Mary Robinson, the first woman to be President of Ireland and a former UN High Commissioner on Human Rights and Climate Justice. What do we want? Climate justice. When do we want it? Well, mitigation. She's an advocate. Co-hosts the show with Maeve Higgins, an Irish comic and writer who hosts her own immigration podcast. I mean, you couldn't get any more virtue signalling in this on one page, could you? And is a contributing opinion writer to an opinion writer. She has loads of opinions, but a little bit fact-free, usually, for the New York Times. And basically, Timala Kodikara, a British producer, artist and activist, is the series producer. Now, this podcast... we'll get to it in a minute. I'm going to leave this as a surprise because you won't believe it. It's hard to imagine anything more contrived, though. The world of useful idiots doesn't even get close to what these lot are doing. Miss Robinson lives in Dublin, but for almost all of the episodes, she comes to New York to record the show with Miss Higgins and Miss Cody Corra. Now, wait a minute. Do I see the first bit of hypocrisy here? Why would anyone go from Ireland to New York to record a podcast? Carbon footprint of enormous proportions spotted 1 paragraph in here. They're not even aware of it. They don't even try and hide it. Why would anyone fly to New York to do a podcast? Why? Well, mainly it's because these people are fake, left, self-indulgent, narcissist propagandists. Could be that, couldn't it? It says, the show focuses on stories of women of colour and indigenous women from around the world. Now, I listened to one of these, right? And they've got this lady from Vietnam, and she was actually quite interesting. But she was outlining that she came from a totalitarian country where she could only get food coupons because her father was a diplomat. And she was saying most people try and grow their own food. She was getting onto some really interesting things, which the hive mind of these two globalist puppets absolutely missed. Oh, well, what do you expect? But basically, the word indigenous is used to indicate those who look foreign to the UN unindigenous, the UN unindigenous, like these two. They have featured women, it says here, like Hindu Umara Ibrahim, a member of the nomadic Pulmabaro community in Chad, who, guess what, seeks justice for women and girls. Now, wait a minute, I thought she couldn't possibly be a UN puppet, this woman. I mean, what are the chances? Well, I checked her out, and yes, she is. She's an expert, get this, she's 35, and she's an expert in adaptation of indigenous people to mitigation and climate change. Well, that's the M word. Mitigation is basically accepting the lobbying for all the fake green, astroturfing, fake green technology that's being imposed on these countries, which is going to impoverish them through the World Bank. So, yes, useful idiots bring in their own useful idiots. But basically, she's a change agent. She attends the UN COP conferences. She signed the Paris Climate Agreement, enslaving her country with, yes, mitigation. And that's where the money is. So, let's see. Women against climate change. Who's the other one? Walia Johns, a member of the Navajo Dini tribe, helping to bring solar energy and green jobs to her community. Another corporate puppet through the organisation Native Renewables, one of her many efforts to achieve climate and environmental justice. These women and others appear on the show as guest hosts to tell their own stories, making manifest the show's tagline, "Climate change is a man-made problem with a feminist solution." Well, there are useful idiots and there are just idiots, and we've got a few of them here. The PC fake feminist agenda is genocide. Fascist scum off our streets. We want weather. We want change. Climate change. When do we want it? Well, let's have some mitigation. In defiance of outdated they're talking about outdated stereotypes, and these two are the epitome of stereotypes. It says, in defiance of outdated stereotypes depicting feminists as humourless and self-serious. Well, these two are just humourless, and they try and be trivial, but it's terrible. Miss Robinson and Miss Higgins working off Miss Cody Corra's scripts. Oh, yeah, it's all scripted as well. There's no spontaneity here, folks. Deliver levity and brightness to a discussion that so often emphasises fear, hoping to leave people feeling informed and, yes, you got it, empowered, rather than scared and depressed. Though not a comedy show, well, I've listened to 1.5 episodes and I can concur with that. It's not a comedy show. Their approach makes room for everyone, from the novice to the expert. All this in spite of that until 2 years ago, Mrs. Robinson didn't know what a podcast was. Well, now she extends her carbon footprint, flying to New York to record something that could have been done on an iPhone or with a Zoom recorder and sent over the internet. Interesting, eh? What about Skype? Have they never heard of Skype? No, what it is, it's about creating a very well paid and virtue signalling job. Mrs. Robinson has said that one of her regrets during her tenure at the United Nations from 1997 to 2002 is that she did not make any speeches about climate change. How dare you? You stole my future. Even though she found climate change worrying to her, the issue had so often been framed as a story about polar bears and melting glaciers, and not always one about people. Well, I can see her right now, clinging to a block of melting ice in the sixth mass extinction, but more likely clinging to her shrinking and melting credibility. But during her travels around the world advocating human rights, whilst living it up like a true fake left, astroturfing, champagne socialist, she began to hear more stories from people living on the front lines of climate change. Yes, there's weather all over the world. And they kept saying things were getting worse. Now, this is really interesting, actually. Has she any research to back this up? She should just have looked at the reports of her backers, the UNIPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, who clearly state there has been no rise in adverse weather conditions for over 100 years. But let's not a fact get in the way of a virtue signalling opportunity. Get this. While visiting South Africa, not long before the 2009 Copenhagen Summit on Climate Change, she heard an affecting story. A Ugandan farmer and grandmother, Constance Okolet, said that the changes farming made more... The changes, it doesn't say what type actually, had made farming more difficult by flooding and drought. In her village, these were unprecedented. Well, basically, I know a lot of people who say, I've never known it be like this. Well, you've only been on the planet 30 or 50 years. I mean, we're talking about a weather system that's been going for 4.5 billion years. You know, I think, yeah, you might be slightly thinking small, a little bit small here. You know, I mean, remember, globalists think big, you know. Well, anything that hasn't happened before, you see, is outside your experience, isn't it? Many farms have been flooded all over the world and in the UK, and it's often not more than once a lifetime. I can remember flooding when I was a kid, but it doesn't happen every year, does it? I mean, in fact, I can't remember when it happened since where I used to live, but it did flood once. So, yeah, there is a certain pattern of reinforcing the need for exaggerating and claims here. But that story and others made international justice and human rights concerns inextricable from climate change for Mrs. Robinson. This woman is beyond stupid. This is absolutely incredible, right? So she goes to a country and there's a farmer there and the farmer says, oh, I've never known weather like this before. How old are you? Well, 50 years old. Well, you can't remember any time when it's flooded before? Well, actually, I haven't really looked, I haven't really checked, you know. So their research is clearly second to none, you know. She said, I always did have a sense of justice and I wanted to study law because I wanted it to be a kind of way to effect social justice and to take cases to correct discrimination. She wanted to bring that sense of justice and her understanding of the intersection of climate change and human rights to a broader audience. Yep, the gravy train, which is what got her the podcast. Now, wait a minute. What do you mean it got her the podcast? I do one of these things called podcasts once a week. I do it from a phone inside. A phone which is inside an acoustic cube, and I don't get any funding for it. Oh, having said that, actually, I've got a Patreon account now. You know, if you go to windowsontheworld.net, I don't even understand what Patreon is, but if you'd like to sponsor me, please do. You know, I think it goes on the same page as all of the information on the homepage, actually. So I wonder how this woman got funded. Well, yeah. This thing, you see, this is where the money is, mitigation. But wait a minute, she flies to New York to record it, you see. I can see huge hypocrisy. And despite, wait a minute, you're going to love this one. Despite her status as a global moral leader. Now, who actually said this? It couldn't have been her, could it? I mean, who actually described her as a global moral leader? And knowledge of climate policy. Well, she's certainly got knowledge of climate policy, but has she got any knowledge of fact or real science? Be worth finding out, wouldn't it? She maintains a profound sense of humility. Wait a minute. Now, if you've got humility, it will just shine through, won't it? But she maintains it, you see. She maintains it all the time. I have learned as much for the podcast as I have contributed to it, she said. I am so impressed by the women that we have been interviewing and listening to with that humour and banter, but a seriousness about the urgency of the problem on the ground. And what they've done is they've got these... I mean, some of the women on it are very interesting, actually. They've come from different places. They've got different experiences. A lady from the Lebanon talking all about different types of eye makeup. No, I'm not being sort of facetious, or undermining it here. It was actually quite interesting what she was saying. But what they do is they choose people who've already been mentored into the UN Sustainable Development Goals. In other words, they're talking about climate change, vibrancy, empowerment, and fake feminism. And if they didn't do that, they would actually be quite interesting, but no, they have to fit into the mould. And let's see what else it says. And while feminism is the solution to the problem, so feminism is the solution to climate change. Did you know this? She stresses the inclusivity of her. We've got the I word now. Vibrant, diverse, and inclusive. We don't exclude men. We just keep them in their place, she said with a laugh. Can you imagine how intolerable this woman is? This is the voice of the manipulating tyrant under the guise of what is known as green astroturfing. Can you imagine spending more than 5 minutes with this monstrosity? Well, I can't. I tried to listen to 2 of the shows, but I got about a quarter way through the second one. But it says Miss Higgins is a comedian, but Mothers of Invention is not a comedy show, she said. Well, that's actually true. It's not funny. However, she sees a vital role for humour in any discussion of climate change and politics in general. Well, there's just none of it to be heard on the show, unfortunately. She says, where I am right now with humour is that it's actually maybe dishonest or unprofessional to not use humour in writing or talking about very serious things, because it's very human to make a joke at dark times, she said. I mean, these people have got no sense of irony or sense of humour. But however, she emphasises the need to help listeners feel that they can take action too. It's good of her though, isn't it? Like many others, Miss Higgins was a customer of J.P. Morgan Chase, which has reportedly committed nearly £200 billion to fossil fuel exploration over the past 3 years. For a bonus episode, she recorded her call to the Chase, asking them for comment on their investment in fossil fuels. It felt like a prank call to them, and they hung up. But that's the action that I took, she said. Oh, she's really persistent then. Oh, dear. This is yawn-tastic. I'm just going to round this up. Before working with Mrs. Robinson on the podcast, this is Maeve, what's her name? She was not a climate expert, though her interest in immigration. She was beginning to see the effects of climate change on displacement and immigration. It's funny how they all put it together when they get mentored into these global hive mind programs, isn't it? All of a sudden it's all interconnected because it's all about mitigation. Yes, Mrs. Kodikara, the producer, has been thinking about climate justice for her entire life. She said, wait a minute, she just did not know it. I mean, I'm reading this out because I can't believe the stunning idiocy and hypocrisy of it. She said, I hadn't really thought about the connections between migration, immigration and climate because the common narratives hadn't made climate appear relevant to black and brown people. Do you get how patronising the spoilt, virtue-signalling narcissists are? They have to delineate about the colour of people's skin, which is a kind of horrible racism, really. They're just disgusting. It says that changed after a conversation with her friend Tanu Yapiaji, Associate Director of United States Communications for 350.org. I mean, everything about this lot is tied in to totalitarian global governance and NGOs controlling the narrative of public opinion. It's incredible. She said, I realised with all that has separated us from each other, climate justice is the great unifier. Now, you thought it was just this nearly 17-year-old woman, Greta Thunberg, that had been under severe mind control. No, there's loads of them. There's hundreds of thousands of these idiots out there. She and the co-host say they understand the value of supporting these women and listening to the knowledge that they've hoarded for generations. Miss Kodikara said, I don't see anyone else doing that. I mean, the conceit and the arrogance here is breathtaking, isn't it? It's absolutely breathtaking. She said to her it's inherently logical. Well, to her it would be, because she knows it all, doesn't she? What kind of solution are you really going to end up with if you don't listen to all of the intelligent and experienced, informed voices, she said. For her, the show's emphasis on levity complements that mission. It is a phenomenal source of power for marginalised communities to be able to laugh and take back control into their hands. Now, you see, the thing is about this podcast is I bet its reach in other countries is absolutely zero. It's there merely as a lobbying platform for these globalist puppets. She says, you can't make a joke in a vacuum. Well, no, you can't. And there's no jokes in the vacuum of mothers of invention. Not one. You have to be in a room, in a community with other people to feel that way. Well, they never go into communities. They just have someone in the studio talking to them who's basically, from what I've seen, very privileged. They don't seem to have any ordinary people on it. She says, I know how huge and beautiful and expansive things can be when we know how to exist around each other. We can do anything, but we have to understand more of where we came from in order to be able to do that. And also how to just exist and be around each other. I know how to do that, so let me show people how. This is sickening, isn't it? It's absolutely sickening. But the show about fashion, it featured a diplomat's daughter from Vietnam who stated that, only people who work for the government get food coupons. And they didn't even pick that up. They didn't even talk about that. It's incredible. I love a bit of irony, and that was it. It embodies the world of the virtue-signalling fake left world of lies, yes, and more lies. But basically, incredible stuff. Now, there's something in here from the UK Guardian, and it says, climate change deniers, new battlefront attacked. Pernicious campaign is unfair on well-meaning people who want to help. It's absolutely incredible. Now, this article is all about the opinions of Michael Mann, the creator of the hockey stick graph, which was put together fraudulently using 3 types of data, which had been corrupted. The ground data, they used the satellite data, and they used balloon data, but they mixed it all up to get what they wanted. You can read all about it. The hockey stick graph, the put together and properly debunked alarmist exaggeration used by the UN. But this article says climate change deniers are switching tactics in the face of mounting evidence of global warming, says Michael Mann. The battle between climate change deniers and the environment movement has entered a new pernicious phase. That is the stark warning of one of the world's leading climate experts, Michael Mann, says The Guardian, with no hint of a sense of irony, director of the Earth Science Centre at Pennsylvania State University. Mann told The Observer that although flat rejection of global warming was becoming increasingly hard to maintain in the face of mounting evidence this did not mean climate change deniers were giving up the fight. First of all, there is an attempt being made by them to deflect attention away from finding policy solutions to global warming towards promoting individual behaviour changes that affect people's diets, travel choices and other personal behaviour. So basically what he's saying is all this other stuff is distracting away from the real lies. So let's stick to the real lies and not get into the side issues, Mann stressed that individual actions, eating less meat or avoiding air travel, well, try telling that to Mrs. Robinson when she goes over to New York to record a podcast. Eating less meat or avoiding air travel were important in the battle against global warming. However, they should be seen as additional ways to combat global warming rather than a substitute for policy reform. In other words, it's all about policy. Bring me the policy. Bring me the draconian measures which take away the rights of all people and put them into the hands of the IMF World Bank. So it's all about policy, not the weather, Michael? We should also be aware how the forces of denial are exploiting the lifestyle change movement to get their supporters to argue with each other. Well, that's the idea, isn't it? That's the whole point. Don't interfere with this. This is the system. This is the system of divide and rule. It takes pressure off attempts to regulate the fossil fuel industry, he says. This approach is a softer form of denial, and in many ways it's more pernicious. It says here, over the past 25 years, man has played a key role in establishing that rising fossil fuel emissions and increasing levels of atmospheric carbon dioxide are heating the planet at a worrying rate. Well, he's the one who actually made it into a fraudulent act. He was also involved in the 2009 ClimateGate affair, in which thousands of emails, many to and from man, were hacked from the University of East Anglia's Climate Research Unit. ClimateGate marks its 10th anniversary this month. Now get this, at the time, deniers on both sides of the Atlantic claimed the emails from UEA, University of East Anglia, showed climate scientists had been fiddling their data, claims that may have contributed towards delay in the implementation of measures to tackle climate change over the next decade, say observers. Subsequent inquiries found no evidence of any misbehaviour by researchers. Well, just read those emails and look at ClimateGate and just take in what they've just said there. It carries on. The denial machine lost a lot of its credibility as a result. See how basically, it's all reversal, isn't it? So you get this negative and turn it into a positive. We were talking about that over the weekend, how protests against closing all the roads and implementing draconian policies by locals were seen as a vocal minority. But guess what? The silent majority were the real majority. So in other words, if you don't say anything, then you're the silent majority and you agree, which is actually how the system works. So you can't really blame them for doing it, I suppose. It says, however, deniers have not given up their opposition to plans to curtail fossil fuel, and among their new tactics, they have also tried to encourage doomism, as Mann put it. This is the idea that we are now so late in the game that there is nothing we can do about the problem, he added. By prompting this doom and gloom attitude, this leads people down a path of despair and hopelessness. No, what leads people down a path of despair and hopelessness is looking at the lies and exaggerations of these globalist puppets and basically evil charlatans, the likes of which we've been describing so far. But it says here, as a little coda to this crap article, it says, we made a choice. The Guardian will not stay quiet. This is our pledge. We will continue to give global heating. See, they can't call it global warming anymore. Wildlife extinction and pollution, the urgent attention and prominence they demand. The Guardian recognises the climate emergency as the defining issue of our times. We made a choice to keep Guardian journalism open to all. We do not have a paywall because we believe everyone deserves access to factual information. What? Everyone does deserve access to factual information, but they don't get it in the Guardian. So enough of that anyway. Anyone who reads this, the Guardian that is, should be living in a smart city gulag. And if they are not, they soon will be. It's hard to find a more fact-free and lying globalist puppet show than The Guardian. It breaks new records in lying and brainless opinions every day. It has more untruths in it than a local council newsletter. I just listened to a podcast they promote, which was the podcast that I talked about, The Mothers of Invention. They're absolutely promoting those two useful idiots. It's just incredible, right? And then I listened to another podcast which they are promoting. Some brain-wiped drone is interviewing another drone about interviewing George Soros. So it's not an interview with George Soros, it's an interview about an interview with George Soros, right? Which is a complete waste of time. But you know George Soros, the philanthropist billionaire who's been used as a hate figure by the extreme right. LOL, PMSL, LMFAO, right? So this stuff is trotted out daily by the globalist, warming, reality-hating and fact avoidance team of the UK Guardian. It's absolutely incredible, right? I mean, I listened to this interview he did with George Soros, and it's worth listening to because he avoids every single question of importance. It's incredible, absolutely incredible. So now a bit of practical alchemy. This is in relation to the Global Action Plan, which is the key to understanding how environmentalism meets development. We talked about this on Saturday. Something I put into my talk and I wanted to share with you. It's about the blending of fire and water. And you say, what's this got to do with the climate change thing? Well, actually, it came out of the Rio Earth Summit. It was something that was said there. In my recent talk, I referred to a reference made by Edmund de Rothschild in 1992 at the UNCED, which is the UN Conference on Environment and Development, also known as the Rio Earth Summit of 92, where all of this globalist policy of climate change was basically introduced. Now, Edmund de Rothschild described the role of the bankers in this new movement as the fire. Now, the environmentalism is the water. I've kept a lot of the more esoteric side of the information outside of what I'm doing when I'm reporting on the New World sort of global governance system for a very good reason. As it is in effect just another management tool, it's another concept of global governance. So just going into this, quite interesting, because the Rosicrucian idea of the blending of fire and water was what I believe Rothschild was referring to. And this goes into management concepts of Freemasonry. And the sons of Cain are fire. This is the Freemasonic idea. The sons of Cain are fire, and the sons of Abel and Set are water. And the idea is that the sons of Cain, through their brotherhood, will use the sons of Set and the sons of Abel as their administrators and serfs to bring about the changes at a lower level. So it's all about management again. So Freemasonry again, just about management. And the idea, this Rosicrucian idea that Brother R.C., who had died 120 years before the Rosicrucians made themselves known, all adds to the mystery, which of course is what attracts interest. People love mystery. So the dead brother R.C. was holding the manifesto of the Farmer Fraternitatis, which was the document that they released in 1610, which was basically saying we need to have a renaissance and a new era of great thinkers in all aspects of philosophy, the arts, and all kinds of systems of governance. And they were asking for the people who were going to do it. So the dead brother R.C. was holding the manifesto of the Farmer Fraternitatis and the rose, holding the rose as in the raising of Lazarus. Now this was all about the allegorical and alchemical marriage of the blending of the fire and water, which is what Rosicrucianism is all about. This is what I think Rothschild was referring to, because he emphasised the word fire when talking about the World Bank. Of course, the water is the environmental movement. So it's interesting that this can be applied in a real and practical way to be used as what is in effect a corporate strategy. Now, getting the great brains of the time in the early 1600s to join the RC was also quite easy. They simply asked that the great and the good would contact them at a PO box, and one day, if they were chosen, they would receive a tap on the shoulder by one of the 12 brothers of the RC, Rose Cross. This would serve two purposes, right? One, as a recruitment drive for the best brains on the planet, and two, to control and direct that information through the alchemical blending process of fire and water. In other words, create the management structure. This would also corral the best brains into one operation. In other words, so you've got a global narrative. So all of the best brains that are chosen, all of the people who can be the very useful idiots, who are in actual fact are very useful, can be corralled into one system. And that's what we're talking about here. There's nothing really mystical about it. It's just a good idea. I always thought that the Rosicrucians was an absolutely brilliant marketing tool, the way that they released the Farmer Fraternitatis and basically asked for the best people to contact them, and then they would be contacted. Great way to control the narrative, isn't it? You get all the best people on your side, and also you monitor what the best brains in the world are doing. It's a little bit like Google, isn't it, really? It's a little bit like the Internet of Things of the 1600s. Yeah, this would corral all the best brains into one operation, so they would be less likely to get in the way. Now, in occult Freemasonry, this is what they believe. The Lucifer spirit, Samael, united with Eve and begat a semi-divine son, Cain. As Lucifer left Eve before the birth of the child, Cain was the son of a widow and a serpent of wisdom. And the sons of Cain are ruled by fire. They like to call themselves the Illumined Brotherhood, or the Luciferians, they are often referred to. And they work with the sons of Set, who are ruled by water, which is their priestcraft, to control the sons of Abel, who are also water. So these people work as one administrative unit, whom they believe through their manifesto and biblical interpretations are docile, compliant, and follow the self-appointed leadership of the Brotherhood of Cain. Does this make sense? I think it does in a global governance kind of way. So when decisions are made by the hierarchy, they can be described as being for the common good. It's quite a revelation, this, to me, because this was actually in a video which came out in the early 90s by a businessman called George Hunt, and he was the only person who attended the 1992 Rio conference, well, apart from General Konstantin Petrov, who actually put it into perspective as to what it was really about and reported on it. Now, George Hunt is dead now, but do look up his video. I actually played his video on Saturday. It was 38 minutes long, and a lot of the people in the room had obviously never seen or heard of it. And what it did, it absolutely validated what we were saying about what was going on now, because it was all planned then. It was all clearly in operation at the time. And what has happened now is the result of then. So what they were talking about then has literally been put into action. Well, basically, talk about smart cities now. These smart gulags that are appearing everywhere. The density of the housing is absolutely incredible. And from the Maldives to Manchester, smart cities are appearing. These gulags, they're springing up everywhere. These huge apartment blocks, they're absolutely massive. They're like super prisons. They're the cities of the future, or to give them their real name, human settlement zones. That's actually what they call them. That's what the UN call them. The high-density new smart city developments are going up so fast that if you haven't been to an area of London for 18 months, some of those places are unrecognisable. Now, I lived in London for 30 years, and a lot of it is unrecognisable now. And a recent journey through Tottenham Hale, which is in North London, it's a place that borders open space between Walthamstow and Tottenham, does Tottenham Hale. I drove through it recently, and it was a bewildering sight, and it was absolutely creepy as well. The density of the new towers, both in relation to each other and the sheer size of them, it's like nothing I've seen in London previously. Even the tower blocks of the 60s are dwarfed by these things. This is density which has never been seen before in this country. We reported that the housing density of these outer London apartments is akin to that over a major tube station. And this is the key. As being on railway links is the idea for the human settlement zones of the future, which is now in the present. The worldwide uniformity of this is also the key. The policies which are driving this are a mixture of commerce and fake green policies. This is where it all ties together. And this is the next thing I wanted to get onto. It's a new smart city in South Korea. It is indeed the future and the present rolled into one. This is what smart cities of the UK will be like. Remember that there are smart cities around the world. There's one called Neom in Saudi Arabia, which is its own jurisdiction. It's a huge city. And there's another one in Kazakhstan called Astana. Look them up. Astana prides itself in businesses having online monitored transactions only, no cash. This is about cashless societies and total control through the Internet of Things. But this article is from the International Business News. When residents of the International Business District in Songdo, South Korea go to work, pick up their kids from school or shop for groceries, driving is optional. Well, it won't be for long, it will be banned. That's because the $40 billion district, currently a work in progress, about the size of downtown Boston, was designed to eliminate the need for cars. a project that began in 2002. The area prioritises mass transit like buses, subways and bikes. This is the template for London. Instead of road traffic, according to Stan Gale, chairman of the Gale International, the developer behind the IBD. Now this is rolled out through massive corporations. They are controlling the infrastructure of cities all over the world, including London. Look at Lend-Lease, look at Bechtel. We've reported widely on this, and those people who are involved in it will call it a conspiracy theory if you mention United Nations Agenda 21. It's actually a 42-chapter document, as we keep reminding them. When completed by 2020, the district will span 100 million square feet. It's located on the northwest side of South Korea. It's building the international business district on reclaimed land along the Yellow Sea. From the first planning stage, the developers aimed to make the district eco-friendly. One strategy was designing the area to reduce the need for cars. Features a mixed-use urban plan, meaning its retail, office space, parks, medical facilities and schools are all close to housing. This is exactly what's going on in London. It's a global action plan, you see. Apartment buildings and businesses were built 12 minutes within bus or subway stops. This is why you're getting this density around Tottenham Hale and in other London suburbs like Walthamstow. They're building thousands and thousands of Gulag flats around the railways, the tube stations. 15 miles of bike lanes go through the district, connecting to a larger 90-mile network to Songdo City. It's got a 101-acre park, which was inspired by Manhattan's Central Park. What you see today in Songdo, a city that is compact and very much walkable, is a direct outcome of this thoughtful approach to planning, Mr. Gale said. Well, Mr. Gale is implementing the totalitarian gulags of the new global governance system. But it is a business, and that's the important thing. The world is being run as a business. Yeah, when the government started planning Songdo City in 2000, 500 tonnes of sand were poured into the marshland to lay the foundation. Currently 20,000 residential units are complete or under construction in IBD, where around 50,000 people live. Approximately 100,000 residents live in the greater Songdo city, so they're making these places, they're creating them. Another perk of living in the district, there are no trash trucks. Instead, a pneumatic tube system sucks the trash from chutes in residential buildings to a central sorting facility in seconds. Everything tracked, traced and monitored. Everything that goes into your house will be surveilled. Everything that comes out is surveilled in real time. This is the smart city agenda. It's either turned into energy or recycled, it says here. Songdo City produces a third fewer greenhouse gases compared to another city of the same size, they say. Around 70,000 people work in Songdo, which is far fewer than the 300,000 people the city government had envisioned. Well, they actually say 50,000 people live there further back in the article, which is a bit strange. So yes, 70,000, so 20,000 commute. For that reason, it could be too early to say whether Songdo will become a thriving urban centre. In a lot of ways, it's the city Koreans want to show the world, it says. In it's clean, futuristic looking with no visible poverty. That's another thing. Poverty will be swept away. It's called social cleansing. There's a ton of people living here, but you don't really see them, one resident, Lindy Wesler, said and told City Lab. So the city is alive, but it's invisible. Now, this is the interesting thing, because when they introduce these areas, they actually become deader than a normal town. That's because people don't go out because there's nowhere to go. So yes, the developers hope that the city will become a model for other cities around the world. Well, don't worry about that. It already is. Oh, and it finishes off with, and indeed it is. The overcrowding is masked by the isolating of the masses in these huge developments. So, yes, the new life of cities, let's get on to it. The populations are managed in their own areas, so there is little need to travel anywhere. There is no point. Everywhere is the same. There is nothing to travel to. You have your supermarket, corporate coffee shop, gym, and a 30 by 10 foot apartment. There is a social area in the apartment gulag, and it is monitored and surveilled in real time. The walls will have ears, and this will be useful for adverts on your smart device, plus a constant monitoring of public opinion and the ability to identify trends of dissent or undesirables. These apartments are for single people, as the cities need hive workers and the drive to reduce population is paramount. Those who live and die here will be happy. They have given up the idea that private travel is a right and never fly, apart from our virtue-signalling narcissist Mary Robinson, of course, who flies all the way to New York to record a podcast. I had to get that one in. Well, it's an environmental crime, isn't it? She should be prosecuted for this. I hope they lock her up in the UN. Oh, they already have. They won't let her out. And something only for the elite business class. That's what flying's going to be, something for the elite business class. They will work long hours, the people in the smart cities, and be carbon taxed on every breath they take and pay heavily for their carbon footprint and electricity usage. They will have groups exercising in small fenced-in parks. I've already seen this in London. And they don't walk. And those who don't walk to work will cycle or take the train. Driverless electric cars will ferry those who can afford it around. Sorry. Just need a cough there. We haven't had a Greta Thunberg episode this week. Greta Thunberg and David Attenborough haven't been in the studio. So I haven't had my half-hour break. We break in the middle of the show. But they will be back on Sunday, which is our usual time, of course. Carbon credits will be taken at source, and eye scanners and biometric ID checkpoints will be set up if you want to cross a city area boundary. This is another thing that's going to happen. There is no need to do this, though, unless you want to visit someone, and eventually you will have to apply for a permit for this. This is what is coming, and most of it is already here. This is what your local council is going to be enforcing, by the way. So the blending of fire and water will result in compliant biological robots, which has been the plan of this agenda since it started, way before 1992. We're actually going back to the 1600s here. And that's a very interesting thing, because the aims of the Rosicrucians to combine fire and water into this synthesis has created the hive mind of the drone. There will be no need to resist, as there will be no other reality. There'll be nothing outside the controlled public opinion corridor. Basically, the UK Guardian reported on the need for energy management through increasing poverty recently. Let's get on to this. Energy bills will have to rise sharply to avoid the climate crisis, says the IMF. Well, it would, wouldn't it? It says governments could use money to help vulnerable people or invest in green energy. That's the green mast bit coming in there. Which, as we have reported, is not going to be able to cope with the demand, thereby introducing rationing through power cuts and creating artificial scarcity, which is the best way of control. So that's what's going to happen in these city gulags. You're going to be controlled, monitored and surveilled, and electricity will start to become scarcer. You will start to have power cuts, which will create a very frightening situation on the streets. So people will stay in, and it will create even more fear, which is the idea of this agenda. It says avoiding dangerous global heating, it's not global warming anymore, folks, will require governments around the world to impose stringent taxes on fossil fuel usage that will mean a 43% jump in household energy bills over the next decade, the IMF has said. This is what has been planned for the last 30 years. The Washington-based fund said the battle against climate change could only be won if the average carbon tax levied by its member states increased from $2, £1.63 a tonne, to 907 kilograms, to $75 a tonne. So from $2 to $75 a tonne for your carbon emissions. This is an extinction programme. I think we should have an extinction rebellion against this, you know. The World Citizens' Assemblies have been instructed that this is unavoidable or UN avoidable, and it must be implemented. So this is what we're talking about. This is a global governance system through the UN, IMF, and it's to control, manage and tax you literally to death. That's the Smart City agenda. The Smart Cities agenda is all about being able to manage population so dissent cannot take hold, controlling the narrative, which is why we have controlled opposition groups, the globalist, anti-globalist protest groups. This has been the goal of controlling the narrative of public opinion through the NGOs, the fake green protests, declaring climate emergencies in a time of very stable weather. It's also about the idiots who are putting out this non-factual nonsense in these podcasts. The one like I was talking about at the beginning of the show. And there's loads of these. There's loads of people linked into this UN stuff. It's absolutely incredible. And they're all getting paid for it. And we're not. So please help Windows on the World. If you can, please donate or even set up a regular little contribution. It'd be much appreciated because we are running on empty. And basically, all these lobbyists are getting paid loads of money. I think it's terrible. They're laughing all the way to the bank. Well, wait a minute. They are the bank, aren't they? For example, they should introduce, it says, carbon tax, which is set to rise quickly to $75 a tonne by 2030. This would mean household electric bills would go up by 43%. Yeah, over the next decade. It's absolutely incredible. I'm just reiterating that. It says to make carbon taxes politically feasible and economically efficient, governments need to choose how to use the new revenue. Options include cutting other kinds of taxes, supporting vulnerable households and communities, increasing investment in green energy, which we know was set up to fail, or well, we don't know that. You might not know that, but I know that because I went to the Green Energy Conference. And also, I've heard it said at the UN in 1992. Again, listen to George Hunt on YouTube. Have a look at that. Unsaid. The Elite Plan Well Ahead, it is called. So basically, yes, supporting vulnerable households and communities. That's good of the IMF, isn't it? Increasing investment in green energy or simply returning the money to people as a dividend. Really? Can't see that happening. The IMF economists said governments could target financial help directly at workers and communities disproportionately affected by the carbon tax, instead of paying a flat rate dividend to everybody. Restricting compensation to the poorest 40% of households would leave 3/4 of the revenue from the carbon tax for investment in green energy. This is an absolute scam, the like of we've never seen. The banks are gonna, the World Bank, and every bank which is a conservation bank, which is every bank under the World Bank, will make an absolute killing out of this, and countries who do not or cannot comply will be destroyed. While about 50 countries currently have a carbon pricing scheme in some form, the IMF said that the global average carbon price of $2 a tonne was far below what the planet needs. It's what the planet needs now, you see. The planet needs this, you know. It's not the IMF, it's not the bank. It said other countries could learn from Sweden, the totalitarian Sweden, that is, which has a carbon tax of $127 per tonne and has managed to reduce emissions 25% since 1995, while the accommodity, I think that's the best way to describe it actually, the accommodity has expanded by 75%. So, yes, the agenda continues and we continue to cover it. And when we go out and do these talks, I often put in information which I haven't actually put out before and start weaving it into the talk. So every talk is different and new information comes in all the time. But what we're talking about here is a template, and it is the most important thing. So I do like to go into the esoteric origins of where this came from. In other words, where the belief system of the people implementing it is. And it's all really about management and control of population. There's nothing really very esoteric about it. Most of it is implemented in a fairly simple way. It's just that the blending of the fire and water is now being applied to banking and environmentalism. These two things joined together are the force of the new economic order of the world, and the IMF is controlling the narrative and the UN is controlling the rollout. It's absolutely incredible, really, the amount of NGOs. And when I looked at those virtue signalling narcissists, the mothers of non-invention, and their links to things like 350.org, their absolute brainwashing into this program and their gravy train self-indulgent narcissism, it actually really does clearly show how this agenda is being rolled out and how these people are being used as useful idiots for it. It's absolutely incredible. Well, More good news on Sunday. We're going to have a bit of a laugh on Sunday, actually. And I'm looking forward to Bristol on Saturday, the Arc in Bristol. So that's it for tonight. Still slightly fatigued, but the energy is returning. So that's it from Windows on the World. See you Sunday at 9 p.m. or in Bristol on Saturday. Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World live every Sunday 9 to 11 p.m. GMT. Check out our archive and programme stream at windowsontheworld.net.